Right, let's make some toxic pools. And to start with, got some insulation board. And I thought this would be used as the bases, so I went round, beveled a piece with a knife, and made a few ovals out of it. Unfortunately, I realised that this was way too flimsy and it was warping already, so I swapped over to foam core and did the exact same thing again. But I kept the insulation board to one side for later. I put a bit more work into the beveling just to make sure it had a very shallow incline on it, and it would meld nicely with a flat board. This is the kind of piece that would very easily fit into either fantasy or post-apocalyptic, depending on the colour scheme you choose. So, grabbing the insulation board from earlier, and just using my hands, tore it up into some kind of fragment pieces, and then edged them around the base of the foam core, trying to preserve a sort of natural rough edge on the inside, and beveling the outside to blend into the base. It took a few iterations to get a pattern I was happy with, but that's the advantage of using materials like these, is you can just pull them apart with your fingers. But it's very much something you have to improvise as you're going along. Once happy with the crater, grabbed my hot glue gun and glued it all down in place. Once this all stuck down, grabbing the knife again, and then blending it to the base by just beveling both the foam and the foam core together. Creating a basing paste out of my usual components, cork flock, PVA and black gesso, I combined it together and then applied it onto the bases. I wanted to leave a bit of the insulation board visible, so applied the paste on the edge as well as in the rim on the crater, just so I could get a kind of crusty looking effect on the inside and blend it into the outside terrain. However, this didn't actually turn out so well, but we'll get to that in a minute. It was also used to fill any gaps between the pieces of insulation board, and just make it all look like one piece. Once dry, you can see it kind of didn't apply the texture everywhere I wanted, but I applied a coat of black gesso to the rest of the piece anyway. To fix this, I made a new basing paste, this one out of black gesso, PVA and fine sand instead of cork flock, which meant you have a much finer kind of grit to the texture. Then, using this to conceal all the mistakes, applied this over the edge and the rim of the piece. But I left the kind of crustier looking stuff around the edge of the pool, because I liked how it looked a bit like a chemical buildup or some kind of crystallization that you'd get from the chemicals in the pool. While that paste was still wet, I remembered to put rocks in this time, and just pushed a few of these aquarium pebbles into the base. Some of the paste was left, so I added 1 part water, just to make it a very diluted solution, and poured it into the middle of the pools, because at this point I didn't know how this was going to turn out. Leaving it overnight, I came back tomorrow and started painting. So to start with a mid-brown, I just hit everything and gave it a base coat. I did, however, leave the centre of the pools black. With a light grey, I then went in and picked out the rocks on the base. Combining the same brown I used for the base coat with white to make a tan colour, I went in and gave the entire thing a highlight. Here's where the sand texture really starts to pop out, and you get some cool little effects, which I was not planning on, but they're a welcome addition. For the pool, I wanted it to look quite violently chemical, and also contrast with the brown. So with an acrylic turquoise paint, went in and gave a base coat of that. And it does darken down when it dries, so it's not quite as garish, but we will build it up to that later. For some texture in the middle of the pool, I took some white acrylic paint and a spare piece of foam, and then just dabbed some texture into the centre. As well as hitting the edges, to bump up the contrast between the turquoise paint and the brown. Waiting until that was completely dry, I then applied a second layer of the turquoise paint over the top of it. And it dries slightly transparent, so you mostly just get a depth of colour where it's been over the white. To further add to the chemical buildup, I highlighted some of the white areas with a yellow paint, just very lightly on the edge, just to make it seem a bit more toxic. And by using such unnatural colours next to the natural ones, you really build up the idea that it is a hazardous and toxic spill. You could call it a day here, but I'm going to grab some Vallejo still water effects and fill the bottom of the pools, just to give them a bit more depth and a glossy finish. Be careful not to add too much water effect here, as it has a tendency to split and crack when it goes above a certain depth, and then you have to fix that later. You're better off adding multiple thin layers and letting them dry completely before moving on to the next one. To add some ripples or bubbles on top of the water, you can also take some Vallejo water texture paste, or Mod Podge works here as well. And then just using the edge of a tool, you can poke some interesting textures into the paste. I tried not to go too close to the edge here, just to build up the impact that there was some kind of depth in the middle, and there was some kind of reaction happening, as well as some distortion on top of the water. The water effects take a few days for the cloudiness to go away, but after that you have some nice toxic pools. And these will go nicely in a post-apocalyptic setting. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you next time.